Hi, this is Brad Silberling, and this would be the point in the process when any decent director would actually invite you to turn off your television and kill this DVD. I'm going to give you sort of a little inside glimpse here today at the wonder that was Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events. We'll cut right to the chase and talk a little bit about the top of the picture. Daniel Handler, who is known as Mr. Snicket's representative, the novelist of these incredible books, did a pretty brilliant thing when he published the unauthorized autobiography of Lemony Snicket back in 2002. And that was that to allow readers to hide that book and its contents from any peering teacher or mother or prying soul, he included a false cover. And so rather than giving away the unauthorized autobiography, he had a reversible cover which actually said The Pony Party, including all the sorts of just deadly, cloying artwork. And so I think one of the very earliest sort of creative decisions I made in approaching the top of this picture was just that I wanted to replicate the spirit of the reversible cover. And that was only going to be done by, frankly, creating a false opening to our movie. At some point, I think in that unauthorized autobiography, Daniel referenced a book which he never referenced again. It was called The Littlest Elf, and he said that basically if you want a nice adventure that's wholesome, it's got good values, read The Littlest Elf, but stay away from A Series of Unfortunate Events. And so, of course, one of the first things I did was ask him to write the first page of that movie. And so he gratefully did so, and there you go. The thought being to, I think, to give a little sense of that wonderful, horrible Rankin-Bass animation that we all remember growing up with, some of us, and to bring it sort of into the year 2004. From that, we segue into really the feel of our picture. For those who have not had a chance to read any of the now 11 novels, they are a sprawling, somewhat Dickensian, very subversive, somewhat Edward Gorey-ish, somewhat Roald Dahl-esque grouping of literature that they do a pretty brilliant thing in trying to create the story of the Baudelaires, and that is that they collide and collapse time. There are these wonderful sense of anachronisms rubbing up against each other, so that you have both, again, somewhat Dickensian landscapes. You've got contemporary technology. You're in your own world, and that was one of the first challenges that, even in reading the book, the first three books, I should say, struck me as the opportunity of making this movie. I'll talk a bit about the process of pulling a team together, but Rick Heinrichs, who was really the masterful hand behind our production design, he and I spoke early on about how do we do that, and we knew we wanted to really hand create our world, and we didn't realize initially that was going to mean literally building every last bit of this movie on a stage. We sort of had this lovely fantasy that we could still go out into the world, find some locations, adjust them, and then make them fit into our world. Well, after a couple good location scouts back east, other than stealing a sense of some architecture and some texture, we just kept looking at each other and realizing we got to bring this back, have to bring it back in. So you're looking at a film that, with, again, the exception of a couple of background elements, is 100% shot on stages. That means both your exteriors and your interiors. And this very lovely briny beach here at the top of the story, which is an important, iconic location from the very first book, The Bad Beginning. You're actually looking at a forced perspective stage shot in the city of Downey, an old Boeing plant where they used to build the space shuttle program, which has now been converted to film use, and where we sort of audaciously decided we were going to build the biggest indoor tank in the Western Hemisphere. It was the only way to try to actually house several of our sets. So you are looking at the north side of that tank with a painted backing and all other elements on set, and that sun that you even just saw there was... No, it's just the lights being smashed through through our backing, right into another perfect example of stage design. We looked in the city of Boston. We looked along Commonwealth Avenue and very much fell in love with the sense of opulence within a city field. But again, just decided we had to create our own Baudelaire ruins. So you are now on stage 16 at Paramount Pictures. We were on 10 stages at Paramount, and we're affectionately known, or I should say unaffectionately known by other filmmakers, as Lemony Piggy, because we really had to monopolize the lot from, what ended up being July of 2003, right through our wrap date of March 2004 out of Paramount, and then we moved to Downey for the last couple of months of work. Again, you're talking about world creation when you're looking at the story of Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events. I was blissfully unaware of these books. I think maybe I had a better upbringing. I don't know, had the right teachers, but somehow I had been, as I say, just absolutely happily unaware of the arrival of these novels when they came on the scene in '99. I do have a child, but she's now only 3 years old and has been already smart enough to stay far away from these books. But in February of 2003, I got a phone call. I was off in Europe hawking my last film with Dustin Hoffman, and sure enough got a phone call asking me if I'd be interested in doing the picture. Had absolutely no idea what the title was. Sounded a tremendous amount like some nice floor polish or wood wax, but decided I would read the first 3 books. And those were The Bad Beginning. They were the Wide Window, and the second book, The Reptile Room. And I was absolutely floored by the sense of subversiveness and playfulness that the author had gotten away with. Frankly, I was shocked that he'd actually found a publisher for these books, and thought if we can actually communicate some of that subversiveness and at the same time create the saga that he had, we'd be in great shape. And again, that means being a little audacious in one's design. And even here, as we see the kids with Mr. Poe, you're looking at a completely synthetic sequence. The car is real. It's a Tatra from Czechoslovakia in the early 60s, but that background is 100% synthetic. It is created by my good friends up at ILM, who had an interesting and unusual task on this movie. Normally, one can have a tremendous division between on-set design and what would be considered sort of post-special effects. And again, the core decision with the film was let's kind of go back and harken back to an older age in Hollywood where we were literally designing everything on stage. So what you're doing is then asking some pretty fabulous computer wizards to, instead of going off on their own, to harness themselves to an old-fashioned feel. So, for example, this set here, Justice Strauss's set, and our good friend Catherine O'Hara, who was kind enough to come in and play the part. That street was constructed at stage 14 at Paramount, a beautiful forced perspective street set with diminishing pieces. And, yes, and the reveal of Count Olaf's house. And what you're looking at there is not only a train trestle, that is actually basically the division between 2 sound stages. We absolutely ran out of room, and were forced to include the door opening between stages 14 and I guess that was 12. And the only way to do that, it's like if you're gonna, if you got to make lemonade out of lemons, we decided that we would construct a railroad trestle and effectively say that Count Olaf lives on the wrong side of the tracks. But there you go. But the idea being that ILM would come in and effectively take their skills, but go back to a more sort of painterly backing style work. So I think other egos might not have been able to handle that, but Stefan Fangmeyer is a phenomenal effects supervisor I worked with 10 years ago, and his crew really kind of rallied to the cause and very much joined themselves with Rick Heinrichs in their effort to come up with a piece that would all feel of a piece. As Jim Carrey said when he walked onto one of our sets in Downey, he said he really felt like he was stepping into a set from The Wizard of Oz. And that was the excitement, I think, for everybody of jumping in here, just completely committing to a world. So, again, let's talk about sort of the task at hand and sort of the dream team. I read these books and think part of it's going to be completely about creating this world, and then obviously part of it's going to be about, it's all going to be about the cast. Jim Carrey, I would say that the greatest part of the casting of Jim Carrey was that it came not from a director, not from a producer, not from a studio, but from a 10-year-old, now 11, I believe. And that is a young man named Sam Miller, who is the son of Jim Carrey's manager, Jimmy Miller, who, being a fan of the Lemony Snicket books, I think when he read the very first one, just basically tugged his dad's sleeve and said, "Dad, here's the deal. Count Olaf, that's Jim." And so in a very wonderful, rare Hollywood occurrence, you had your star coming to the table, having been urged to do so by a man under the age of 15. I do hope he's collecting that 10%, though. I haven't spoken to Jimmy Miller about that, but that's another conversation. And the first conversation I had coming back to Los Angeles to talk about doing the film was with Jim Carrey. Jim and I had not met before, and I think I walked into a room expecting what we like to affectionately think of as me, nothing, me, nothing, me, meaning that just complete self-interest when it would come to what his part in the film would be. And what I was stunned by was it was just the opposite. Jim Carrey is a guy who has a tremendous storytelling head. He was most interested in talking about the design of the entire story, about Count Olaf's incarnations, in really making for I think the most entertaining possible story. And we sat and in the course of the first 2 hours of our meeting riffed, and actually the conclusion of the film came from that very first meeting. So that began a process of collaboration that I'll talk about more later, but it spurred in us the realization that we could sit and make a lot of discoveries together very quickly. And that lent itself actually to the ultimate performance. You've got in Jim a guy who has tremendous skills as an improvisational actor and comedian. And so we had the opportunity. We were working from eventually a script written by Bob Gordon, who's a wonderful writer who, amongst other things, wrote Galaxy Quest. And Bob did a phenomenal job in a tall order of adapting Daniel Handler's work. And then what Jim and I discovered in the process of trying to create the various looks for his characters, meaning Count Olaf, Captain Sham, Stefano, we discovered that in the process of doing makeup, hair, and wardrobe tests, we could learn an awful lot about these characters. As a director, my task is always to find out as much as I can about the characters before I even begin to try to tell the actor, that he should be going right as opposed to left. And Jim, too, was trying to discover who these guys were. And so the greatest thing was when we sat down and did our first makeup, hair, wardrobe test with Count Olaf. We did a smart thing. We had our sound mixer present. Normally you only have your camera running and your crew. And we sat and did this really wonderfully odd, spontaneous sort of Q&A in which I parked myself by the lens and found myself just asking him questions. In character, though, I wanted to know Count Olaf's opinions about school vouchers, and I wanted to know his opinions about, quality family time, and the riffs that came from those questions, and Jim's ability then to just roll. First, we just thought it was completely entertaining, and then he and I looked at each other at the end of it, and we were reviewing the tape and thought, this is actually incredibly important material. So what we did was begin a process where we would review all of these great little bits of improv as we came to testing each of the characters. And then we would, frankly, just steal the greatest moments, both for story and for character. And so ultimately what you see is that you got about 80% of Jim's material in the picture that really resulted from these improvs. And there'll be a separate section here on the disc which will point up, in certain moments almost frighteningly so, how remarkable that translation process was. Anyway, so again, a collaboration which started right at the outset in terms of a sense of real story awareness on his part, and then just great discovery. Interestingly, in these novels, one of the great opportunities for a director comes when there's not an overspecification of detail or, frankly, character dialogue. When you're doing an adaptation, many people ask me as I was heading off, are you completely intimidated by going into a world that's very important to readers? And I think you always have to make a decision, which is that you are as great an audience member as anybody, and if you have a real emotional reaction reading a piece of material, then the images that come from that, the ideas, why not go with those and trust them? And So we did, but what's great is that, again, because if you read through Daniel Handler's books, you actually discover that he might mention Lousy Lane, but there's not a lot of description there. There might be a suggestion of the Baudelaire's frame of mind, but it's not backed up by a lot of character interaction or dialogue. It's one of the very spare and brilliant ways in which Daniel Handler manages to spur the imaginations of his readership. And so we decided we would really take advantage of that. So again, in every department between design and then between our character moments, we thought we would run with that. Interestingly, when I was early in prep, I had a chance to meet Daniel and walked him through, along with Walter Parks and Laurie McDonald and Bob Gordon. We brought Daniel down initially to explain to him the story structure that we had in mind, and he was supportive. He was a little worried that the picture might end up being too long. He had prior to our trying to mount this movie, he had worked on a number of drafts of a screenplay and realized that it was a very tricky thing to do, but was supportive. But as I started to prep the film, I excited to have his cooperation and involvement, would call him from time to time and say, hey, here's what I'm planning to do with with Lake Lachrymose. Here's what I'm planning to do with this. And Daniel was great because effectively he would just say, well, that's interesting. I never knew what that was. So again, as opposed to walking into, as he said to me, I won't Anne Rice you. And that's the kind of sort of creative license that you really, are appreciative of. And need to go off and to kind of bravely try to tackle a piece like this. So off we went. We had this sort of freedom with design, with performance. And what was important was we also needed to take that to the story level. These are incredibly episodic books. That's the nature of them. They are there will be 13 books in their totality. They are a true serialized story. So you have a conclusion at the end of each one and a sort of wonderful repetitive structure. And that then meant for us we had a real interesting story problem, which was that in the first book, The Bad Beginning, the kids are sort of put into indentured servitude, as you see here, making puttanesca pasta with Count Olaf. And he ends up realizing the only way to get the Baudelaire fortune is going to be to concoct this horrible play, The Marvelous Marriage, which, of course, he will be able to dupe his audience into thinking they've come to see a bad piece of theater. But being like The Emperor's New Clothes, nobody's going to actually admit that he's the worst actor they've ever seen or that the play is the worst that they've ever seen. And he manages to try to legally marry Violet. Great story point, very twisted, of great concern to many in the moral majority, but nonetheless very successful. And we realized that we couldn't actually end our first act as the book does. The book actually ends with the kids managing to unmask Count Olaf's dastardly plan. Olaf and his troupe escape and live to see another day, which begins in book 2. The danger, of course, for a motion picture structure is that you then have the kids having to unmask Count Olaf and publicly, as I say, sort of reveal his wrongdoings at the end of each act. You can't do it. So Walter Parks, Laurie McDonald, Bob Gordon, and I spent quite a bit of time early in the development process trying to figure out a way in which the kids could escape Count Olaf's clutches, but without having had the opportunity to effectively unmask him. And we realized that the conclusion of the first book was going to be a really strong potential climax for the movie. So our film ends with what would have been the end of book 1. But that meant that we needed to sort of do the impossible, which was we needed to be able to create outside of the world of the books a sequence, a story turn, where the kids, again, would be taken from their first guardian, Count Olaf, to their second guardian, Uncle Monty, who is the star of the second book, The Reptile Room. They would have to be brought there, of course, by Mr. Poe, the fantastic Timothy Spall, I'll speak more of later. And yet Mr. Poe, as any of the readers of the books know, is the most wonderfully clueless banker that the world has seen. He is the executor, if you will, of the executor of their parents' wishes and the estate of the Baudelaires, and yet he misses every sign around him that there are problems. So we needed effectively Mr. Poe to do the right thing which was to remove him from, to remove the kids from Count Olaf, and yet do so under false pretenses. So this wonderful sequence where we actually needed to have the kids have a real emotional moment and take stock of their parents' loss. This too was a creation. Again, the books rarely take that moment to actually have honest conversation between the Baudelaires. It's always felt in the books. It's felt between the lines. And that's to Daniel's credit. Movies are different, and we needed to find a way to viscerally bring that across. So you're seeing the beginning of a sequence now that is pure creation on the filmmaker's parts. This open dialogue, again, then feeding into a sequence that we were all very excited and proud of, and that is our train sequence. And that is a sequence which, again, does not exist in book one, but will end up rendering the perfect situation to have the kids actually removed from Olaf and then brought back. Interestingly, in the books as well, the Baudelaire parents I always used to liken to the adults one sees in the Charles Schulz Peanuts world, where they're always just sort of, adults are usually a set of legs and a set of wah 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 wah, non-literal creations. And I made a real specific choice in heading off to make this movie, which was I never wanted to see an actual photograph of the Baudelaire parents, because in a sense, you want to stay with your kids. You want to stay in their point of view, and you want to realize that they are alone. They need to be resilient. And yet I did want to have a sense that the parents have not emotionally completely abandoned the kids. And that led to, along with Jerry Moss, my master prop maker, the creation of this set of silhouettes, which felt very much of the period. And Rick Heinrichs, my production designer, he would be that silhouette on the left, and the one on the right looks, I don't know, suspiciously like my wife. I don't know why that would be. But we came up with this as a bit of a totem that could be taken with the kids from spot to spot. And I think one of the things I'm happiest about is that you do have a sense, not only here at the top with the silhouettes, but at the conclusion of the story with this posthumous letter that arrives, that there is a sense of, while the kids are off fending for themselves, that there is still this sort of family connection. So again, now moving on to our train sequence. And once again, you're looking at a complete piece of blue screen work, but one that was created to fit the feel of our film. So you're looking at actors sitting in a car being rocked by grips in the city of Downey, and a completely synthetic background until here. Now we're arriving at really what was one of the hallmark sets and pieces of creation of Rick Heinrichs. We are now completely on stage here in Downey. The Last Chance Superette is a nice nod to the Last Chance mom and pop store from book 8 in the series of Lemony Snicket's books. And Rick did sort of the impossible. He and I gave up very quickly trying to find that sort of great iconic train track and mom and pop store. We wished we could have found it, and we realized very quickly we couldn't. But we talked a lot in the design of the picture about William Cameron Menzies and about sort of these great classic, strong, simple, mythological pieces of design. We talked about that great fence line in Invaders from Mars, which it was all built on stage, very simple, but sort of suggested a world beyond it. We also talked a lot about the design and the use of forced perspective and backings, and it's sometimes even miniature players in Night of the Hunter, which oddly has tremendous story similarities to ours. Don't know that it was actually ever suggested to be a family film. Don't think it was. But if you think about it, Robert Mitchum and Jim bear a horribly similar story appearance, in that each of them is desperately after these kids' fortunes. So, conclusion, Rick and I looked at each other and said, yep, yet another set that's going to have to be on stage. And what he did was he created a perfect 360-degree forced perspective set, meaning that if I'm with my camera here by the car with the kids, looking out in any direction, you're looking at a physical build in forced perspective in terms of train tracks and grasses and corn stalks, all fading away and then fading off into a backing that was a 360-degree backing. So a phenomenal piece of work that he pulled off, only aided by my wonderful friend from Mexico City, Manuel Lubezki, fondly known as Chivo, my cinematographer. Um, Chivo and I have been friends for a number of years and had always wanted to work together. Rick and Chivo had done Sleepy Hollow together over in the UK. And when I first approached Chivo, it was because I knew that to have somebody who had the sense of being able to remain within a reality, but at the same time create a real illustrated world on screen, it takes some courage, and it takes somebody who is a little left and a little bent, which is my friend Cheeves. And he thought we were absolutely mad. He was coming off of another picture when I tried to bring him into Rick and I, our early art department viewing room, and began to show him how much of the, if you will, the exterior world we were going to try to be building on stage. And he laughed, made a little symbol with his fingers like he was smoking a certain narcotic, and looked at us like we were out of our minds. But bless his heart, committed. And so what you're seeing is the result of probably the greatest collection of what they call space lights, which are huge lighting fixtures suspended over the floor, and only at a distance of like 5 feet between each of them. I mean, easily 1,500 of these collected. We had to have ones manufactured beyond having snapped up everyone in town in order to create this exterior-interior look. A phenomenal piece of lighting, and a very tricky one. And so this was a daily trek. But he and I spoke early on about unmotivated lighting. We talked about that there's always that opportunity for, in a story that is coming from sort of a storybook, a storybook feel, that you don't have to be slavish to source lighting and to some of the other feels that one normally does. So as you go through the picture, you'll see in many cases there's this wonderful soft source of light coming off from the side that bears absolutely no relation to anything in the frame. And it really is a testament to his skill that he managed to keep and make the film feel coherent, along with, again, the work that ILM did here. You're looking at a 100% computer graphic train, the only CG element here on this entire sequence. And once again, it was a doubly tricky feat for them, because they were having to not only create a good photorealistic train model, but again, as I mentioned, you're talking about a set which goes off in forced perspective, and so they had to scale that through that whole sequence. So a remarkable feat. Now let's talk a little bit about these performers. The scene you've just seen, of course, highlights, amongst others, the very calm and cool, collected personality of one Sonny Baudelaire. I think probably the greatest attraction and repulsion in reading the books when I first did was the character of Sonny. And again, for those who are first-time viewers, you will come to get to know that Sonny, although being an infant, is very much her sibling's equal. And what I loved in reading the books was that the Baudelaires do not treat their sister as an infant. She's very much treated as an equal, and she is filled with intent, as we've seen earlier in the picture. If there's a fight to be called out, if there's going to be a brawl, you bet it's probably going to be Sonny who's there and responsible for it. So great, fantastic, exciting, love the idea. And then you're confronted, of course, as you start to prepare the movie, of how the hell are we going to do this? And to be honest, given that she's, again, part of every scene, given that her behavior is antithetical to what, frankly, would be the normal behavior for a 16 to 18-month-old, you really sit and scratch your head. At the top of the process, to be honest, it seemed so daunting that I really headed down a road of considering a computer graphic approach, because let's just talk about the realities of shooting with infants. You've got basically 4.5 hours a day from the time an infant comes on the clock until she's wrapped. It doesn't matter if the poor thing wants to take a nap, has a toothache, or just doesn't like your face that day. Once she's on the set, that's it. And if she decides she is leaving that set, your clock is running. And so, again, faced with that fact, faced with all of the other behaviors, Rick and I actually spent a lot of time exploring, and early conversations with Stefan Fangmeyer, the possibility of Sonny being completely computer graphic. We actually headed down the road, began one test, and what was very apparent to me was that I actually thought, interestingly, technologically, it would be possible. And the nice surprise for those who are not already aware is you've already seen two of four completely computer graphic images of Sonny in this movie. You've already seen them, and I will point them out because they will be reprised. But the idea of not even expense, but the idea of the quality and time of animation that was going to be necessary to pull that feat off just seemed impossible, given that we started our film with a release date, which is never the way filmmakers like to work, but it was just the truth. So having gone down a road of exploration, we knew that in a couple of key moments we could dip into the bag and try to pull off maybe a more interestingly difficult trick, which was working with a real set of twins through the whole film, and at certain key moments when, because of safety or some other detail, we have to dip into a digital Sonny. The hope was that we could do a pretty seamless match. And as I say, we've already seen it twice. One of those images, which will be reprised at the end of the picture, is one of my favorite shots of the piece, and that is Sonny hanging from the table. And what you're looking at there is a little piece of motion capture with a 3-year-old captured up at ILM San Francisco, and that information then applied to a 100% digital model. The model, of course, was based on our twin girls, and that was Shelby and Kara Hoffman. Like any film that has the audacity to call itself a series of unfortunate events, our production process certainly decided to behave that way. We had nothing but nightmares the first week of shooting. The greatest being that I had cast 3 really lovely young girls who were 2 years old at that point, from Florida. Great girls named the Tiffins, and they brought themselves out with their family, thinking that I was going to outsmart the process by hiring triplets so that I would have 3 times the amount of time. Off they came, 3 sets of wardrobe, crew of hundreds waiting to go, ready to happen, and of course we discovered that the triplets had just phenomenal separation anxiety. So I think Chivo and I and my crew looked at each other the first shot and realized we were dead. But whether it was for insurance reasons or otherwise, we were encouraged to, at least for the first 2 days, to try to make it work. I had a very long expression from my producers, who I think were trying to see the positive side of things, but I think pretty quickly realized that it was the case. So sure enough, lots of big discussions, physical production from the studio executives coming down to the set, lots of hubbub, and of course the conclusion is, yes, the director's going to have to take that long walk to the trailer to fire the triplets. So day 3 of our shoot, there I go, walk into a trailer where I've got 3 young brunette girls looking at me as they're otherwise watching Barney. And I have the conversation with a really wonderful woman, Beth Tiffin, who was very understanding. And so the girls are let go. It's a Wednesday. Every day with a crew as large as ours costs a tremendous amount of money. And off we need to go to find another set of Sonnies, and with no time to spare. And thankfully, the Hoffmans presented themselves. They had been put on tape, and I saw them over the course of that weekend, brought them in, and sure enough, away they went. So you are seeing basically 2 girls throughout the piece. And I think one of the greatest victories of the movie is that it takes advantage of a real child's behavior. These girls were 14 months old when we began shooting. I can't, having, again, a 3-year-old now, imagine little ones that age having the stamina, the personality, the tenacity to stick with everybody. But these were girls who just loved to play and who loved their co-stars. You're probably seeing Shelby a little bit more often than Kara. There's Shelby, awfully tired that she is. Kara Hoffman, unfortunately, had the task of being present in that scene you briefly saw ago where the incredibly deadly Viper makes his exit for the first time. And we lost poor Kara after the first take, the first reference take, when this wonderful big, at that point, rubber snake came flying out of the cage. That was it. And I think, truth be known, I didn't see a lot of Kara for the next 2 months. She was not happy with her director or the set. So Shelby, bless her heart, was more than willing to come in and really take over. The number of moments in the production of this movie where everything's in place, the lighting's just right, the acting is just happening, everything's going well, but the little one falls asleep, phenomenal. If you look at those eyes right there, you know you're moments away. The whole crew would get to to know the girls well enough to think that they were going to go down. And perhaps if we're kind enough here, we will assemble a nice collection of images to show you some of the greatest moments in the film where these girls are absolutely conked out flat. Meryl Streep, I think in sort of reviewing the whole experience of her involvement in this movie, said that it was actually quite humbling because what she realized was that it really was about the babies. And she was right. Effectively, if the girls were in good shape and they were engaged, boom, you were up and running. And if not, nothing more fun than seeing a movie the size and scale and budget well over $100 million grind to a halt when you've got young kids falling asleep on you. So here we are jumping back into our picture at Uncle Monty's. Again, note the backing in the background, a good old piece of stagecraft. And probably my favorite character incarnation of Jim's in the movie, and that is the wonderful Stefano. Again, we arrived at these characters through a process of playing with makeup. Jim would then almost try to inhabit each set of makeups and hair. We initially went off in a different direction with Stefano. In our initial concept, we went with the name, and actually Jim found himself kind of heading off down on a very sort of flamboyant, overly romanticized Italian fellow. It was Jim's sort of, or I should say it was Count Olaf's bad set of choices trying to do his own sort of Antonio Banderas. And we did the test, and I just could not sleep. And I came to Jim the next day and said, I just think we're making a mistake. Somehow it's rolling with the punch. It's too on the nose. I think we've got to come up with something that's a little bit more bent. And again, good collaborators. He and I sat and talked about what is that? Well, it's actually, if the man is going into a disguise, and this is the first time he's doing this, he's actually trying to hide. He's trying to be invisible, as opposed to sort of being incredibly flamboyant. And so, lo and behold, we decided let's take that Olaf wig, create a comb over, put a pair of glasses on, try to make him feel almost more like an academic, more professorial, if you will. And so got all the preparations ready. Colleen Atwood, master mistress here of wardrobe design, came up with this great sort of lab smock, if you will, of Jim's. And comes the night to photograph this test. I walk into the makeup trailer, and Jim looks at me very sort of pained, I think, at that point, as if he's just been possessed, and starts to do the voice that you're hearing now. Stefano, a man that he thinks must have been born somewhere in the studios of the Discovery Channel. And I just doubled over. But Jim was very concerned and looked at me and said, this guy can't be Stefano. It's like his name's Stefano. This isn't an Italian man. And it was perfect. I say the words. And he said, I am an Italian man. And the character was born. So you will see in our separate treatment of all of our makeup, hair, wardrobe tests, again, how much of the material for Stefano was born that night. Now, looking at this scene reminds me again of the even larger feat that we had to pull off in the picture, and that is that you have somebody with the versatility of Jim Carrey. You have somebody with the skill and comedic abilities of Billy Connolly, who was kind enough to take on the role of Uncle Monty. The danger, of course, is that basically you'll have the brightest sort of star in your universe sort of outshine everything around. And this was a film that needed to try to be faithful to a set of stories that are really from the kids' perspectives. So what does that mean? That means trying to cast a couple of kids as the Baudelaires, the elders, in this case, Violet and Klaus, who could really stand up to Jim Carrey. And as you see with that face there on your right frame, Emily Browning is just a phenomenal young talent, a very timeless face, and somebody who is so relaxed and confident that you can believe her tying her hair up, and she's going to solve the problem. There is that timeless quality to the piece as a whole, and it needed to inform the casting of these kids. I had to have looked at, good Lord, close to 100 hours of tape. We had casting sessions, in at least 4 continents, and each case was different. Avi Kaufman, whom I've worked with now on a couple of my pictures, who is just gifted when it comes to actors both young and old, and will not only scour the theater, she'll scour schools. She will look at any possible source to find the right casting with her sense of character. called me very excitedly because she had seen, while at the gym on the treadmill, a repeat of an Australian television drama thing called Blue Heeler. And sure enough, I got a piece of tape. I think at that point it was already a couple of years old, of Emily Browning, and was just knocked out. Here was a young girl who had not really worked in this country but had been working in Australia since she was probably 8, who was so, again, relaxed and credible that I got excited. I got worried because you're always setting yourself up for disappointment, but told the studio I really wanted to fly her in. So comes Emily Browning and her father in from Melbourne, Australia. She and I spend a day together. I forget that I'm dealing with somebody who at that point is 14 years old. I feel like I'm certainly dealing with somebody who's as mature, or frankly, far more mature than I am. And more than that, I'm floored by the fact that she, when we sit and choose to do a little bit of reading, has absolutely no accent. And I was dumbfounded and said to her, tell me, how the hell did you just do that? Because I was, of course, prepared for the cost and work that was going to be to bring in a dialect coach. And like all good 14-year-olds, she looked at me with tremendous sort of boredom and disdain of the idiocy of adults. And she said, Brad, we grow up with American television. What do you think I've been watching since I was 3? So there's her set of skills as we know it. So very quickly, Emily had that job. Liam was a different case, which I'll speak about here. Just want to point out as we glide by it, I mentioned Night of the Hunter, and sort of the homage I was very excited to try to pull off was a key moment late in that picture with Lillian Gish in a rocking chair, sort of guarding the roost as Mitchum sits outside. And, of course, we decided we would do the reverse. And so there's our friend Jim Carrey with that long knife on a set that was honestly built just for this image, which you try not to actually really explain to the studio. You make them feel like it's going to be multi-faceted and used for many things. But let's get honest, it was built for that image, and that's the one image of it in the movie. Liam Aiken. As important as Violet is going to be, Klaus is equally important and difficult. You've got a young guy who could be the world's most nerdy, boring character because his fascination is with books and with research. But what you want is a kid who's got a sense of spunk, I think, and again, an odd old soul quality. And Liam came into New York in my casting process. And I told him then that he got the job because of one word, and that was we read a scene in which the scene after Count Olaf has slapped Klaus, and Violet, not knowing what to do for her brother, asked the question, "Are you okay?" And the response was no, which of course in the hands of a young actor could get incredibly melodramatic. And so we sat, Avi reads the scene with Liam, and Liam in his own great way says no, which did it all for me. Told me, okay, here is a kid who's going to be honest, who is going to respond as a real teen would, and with no sense of obligation to entertain, to brook any sort of bull. And so I knew then that Liam was going to have the job. Saddest thing, poor thing, was I actually called the guy and thought, okay, I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to leave a message for Liam or try to connect with him at home, put him out of his misery, which is always a moment I enjoyed, letting people know they've actually got the gig. And, of course, it turns out I leave a message on his home in New Jersey. His answering machine is garbled, and the poor guy for the next 48 hours is trying to track me down. All he's heard is that I'm calling, and right at the point of my giving him the job, the tape garbles, and so he doesn't know if he's getting the polite handoff or if he's actually got the work. But there you have it. So we're ramping up now to one of the other moments in the picture where, as I explained, Sonny has to be the one driving a scene. One of the great things in the second book is the sequence with the incredibly deadly viper, where it's Sonny. It's not just Klaus and Violet who create solutions, but Sonny herself realizes she needs to save the day in order to prove to everybody that Stefano is not Stefano but Count Olaf. So what's that mean? That means proving to the world that the incredibly deadly viper is not incredibly deadly, as Stefano has been trying to now hoodwink everybody into believing, but that he is a big softy, as Uncle Monty has told us. And that means she's got to basically engage the incredibly deadly viper in play. So much of a sadist as every director can be, even I couldn't quite figure a way in which I was going to, with any good heart and sleep at night, try to wrangle our young girls with a gigantic viper. combined with the fact that, frankly, our incredibly deadly Viper is 100% CG. So here you come with a nice big build-up to 2 of the 4 images that were going to be 100% CG, and that allowed us to both have our CG Viper completely interacting and wrangling with our CG Sunny. So you're looking at the fruits of labor of, boy, tremendous amount of R&D. And with our recurring and traveling image here of the reel-to-reel tape deck, which I couldn't help but try to bring into the movie, we head now to Lake Lachrymose. Again, this sort of collision of anachronisms gives you tremendous freedom in terms of design ideas. And I just remember early on saying to Rick that I love the idea that rather than there being like an 8-track or a cassette in the cars in our world, that why not have a nice little reel-to-reel? And I think I pulled some images of 2 of them, a reel-to-reel from The Conversation and a reel-to-reel the top of Clute, I think it was, that I gave Rick. And so there you had dashes completely built in. Bringing you to Lake Lachrymose, you're looking now at a set, again, just great piece of stagecraft there. You're looking at a 100% in-camera image on stage at Downey. And there was a wonderful still photographer named Michael Kenna who I used as a reference point, I think, a lot in the pre-production of the movie, both with Rick and with Gio, who shoots landscapes, some of them industrial, some of them natural, but very spare and very theatrical. And you'll see in many cases that were you to go and investigate his work, you'll see the parallels. So again, the same thought of William Cameron Menzies and Kenna, these very strong, very sort of theatrical images as opposed to 100% naturalistic. Of course, arriving at Lake Lachrymose means arriving at the door of Aunt Josephine. Probably one of the most bent pieces of Meryl Streep's, I think, resume that one's ever going to see. The Josephine is a woman who, the star of the third book, The Wide Window, we get a sense was once a brave and adventurous woman, part of this very nefarious and secret organization that we're learning about called VFD. But I still remember reading the book for the first time and just laughing out loud as you realize that this woman is effectively an agoraphobe. She is paranoid. She is afraid of her own appliances. And so you set about trying to cast that part, and so often great casting comes from great contrast and unexpected behavior. And so you think, okay, you take one of the most stable and most trustworthy and most grounded performers that you can think of, in this case probably like, one of her couple of greatest living actresses ever, and that's Meryl Streep, and take that person and suddenly make her become the absolute wingding that you need Aunt Josephine to be. And you got a pretty fun performance. And Meryl, to her credit, very much like Jim, I thought we were going to be the smart ones to try to track her down. Meryl was very familiar with the books and with this part because of her youngest daughter, who was a fan, and who gratefully had some very big opinions too about wardrobe and exactly what Aunt Josephine should be. But a first meeting with Meryl Streep was just an absolute dream for a director. Though I will tell you that the first day one is directing Meryl Streep, you call action, you call cut, and all I know is I remember walking back to the monitor, looking at my assistant director saying, I can't believe I just gave an adjustment to Meryl Streep. But this is a woman who makes everybody feel so immediately relaxed and who genuinely shows up with a wonderful, very refreshing set of nerves the first day, and she's very quick to say that she's anxious and nervous and everything that you would never expect her to be. Again, just a perfect choice. And an important story issue to bring up, too. You've got, of course, now your third guardian, who the kids have been brought to. I believe when Daniel Handler was initially designing a screenplay, that there had been a thought to include the first and the third books. And one of the thought processes for me, and I think it was the first thing I explained to everybody at Paramount DreamWorks when I met with them, was that I think you needed to give the kids at least an opportunity to have some chance for a real home, some sense of hope, even if it gets dashed. And that is why we did take that very important detour to Uncle Monty's home. Uncle Monty, of course, as you've seen with Billy Connolly's performance, incredibly warm. Not only that, but very aware of the kids' gifts, as he's always very verbal about, and sees them for what they are. So his home seems like a little slice of heaven, and of course, boom, it's dashed. So that now that you're prepared, as you come to Aunt Josephine, to have somebody who's frankly going to be a little bit more off her nut and not have a problem. Again, just the blend of stage and non-stage magic. You're looking at the fine interior of Aunt Josephine's house on stage 16 at Paramount. We again had so many sets to build that in many cases it was a chessboard, and Jim Van Wyck is the greatest producer a director can ever have, worked very carefully with Rick Heinrichs to sort of schedule these sets. So the set we're in now existed in the very same space as the Baudelaire Ruins set. We started our production schedule with the Baudelaire Ruins, shot the beginning and ending of the movie, which is always tough for a set of young actors, and then that was struck, and Aunt Josephine's house was constructed. Now this house, because of the hurricane to come, ended up having to be a real piece of design magic, an engineering feat, frankly, that Mike Lantieri, my wonderful on-set special effects expert I've worked with before, really had to sit and mastermind with the engineers. And you've got a set that is basically built on gimbals, that has the ability to head down to a tremendous slant, and is basically built in modular pieces. The wide window in the library, which we're in now for the scene as we meet up with Meryl's fears about realtors and leeches, had to be a piece that could collapse on its own in the sequence that we were going to be arriving at later. And so you had a set that basically was built with what amounted to a big exoskeleton, a roll bar that would not be visible within the set, but basically covered the outside of the set. Again, not a lot of time to turn these things around, and of course, never enough time for directors and department heads to discuss. So one of the great moments, unfortunately not captured on film, was the day in which the director tries to explain to Michael and his crew how far he needs that. I have to give a big shout out here to Jane Lynch, our fabulous realtor, who many of you will recognize from many of Chris Guest's movies. Just an unbelievable actress who was willing to come in and just kind of jump into the fray with us. Anyway, so big hey to Jane, and thank you for her part of it. Anyway, so you've got a director, you've got an effects crew, and it's time to sort of test this. So, is it going to be a 1.5 or a 2-foot drop that I'm going to need on this set? And so director stands in the middle of that little library set. Of course, the grips and the camera department are smart enough to each kind of grab a piece of the crown molding around the room. And when we count 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, all I know is I'm about 9 feet in the air and come crashing down. Every piece of glass in the set was destroyed. And the beauty of somebody with Michael's experience is that very kind of dryly, he and Tom Pock, his alter ego, look at me and say, "Well, that's why we test these things."
It is. It's the whole ball of wax. The entire kit and caboodle. Why, without your good grammar, the whole darn shooting match could go horse or ticket.
Anyway, we then, of course, now arrive back from Paramount to meeting Captain Sham. And in many cases with Jim's characters, again, there was an evolution and we made discoveries in the makeup hair process. Captain Sham was just a stroke of, I think, real brilliance in Jim's part. That was something he arrived at early. When we started talking about Sham, we were batting around ideas, and I said to him, there's a sort of wonderful kind of Gregory Peck quality that I was sort of hoping to get to out of Moby Dick. And he loved that. But, of course, Jim being the good Canadian that he is, he had a sound in his head, and that was the sound of as he says, a Newfie, those with sort of a great accent from Newfoundland that he just came in with. And so really one of the earliest sort of story meetings I remember having was basically hearing this wonderful Newfie accent. So great, bring that in and know that as opposed to Stefano, where we're going to have, X number of minutes with him on screen, really Captain Sham and Josephine, we're going to have one. They're really going to have one scene. So we wanted to make it just sort of a breakout scene. It became the weirdest seduction scene I think I've ever certainly committed to film. And, I always liken it to sort of, Robert De Niro and Pacino in the movie Heat. It's like, you always want to see certain people together. I don't think anybody in their right mind could have ever dreamed of trying to pair Meryl Streep and Jim Carrey in a love scene, but here you go. Again, all of this tremendous dialogue coming out of earlier improvisation work. You're looking at a peg leg that is, a piece of good IL image. Jim's leg actually was dangling beneath that peg leg, and in a technique I think really sort of perfected back when they were working on Forrest Gump. That's sort of simply removed with CG. But again, I always love to have everybody note the detail in Rick's design here, again in Downey on this set. There was a wonderful little tag to the scene which just didn't quite play, but I will include it on a deleted scene where the two of them head off, and Meryl's character basically admits that she hasn't been on a date in a long time. And anyway, just fantastic work. Lenny Clark, by the way, a great comedian from Martha's Vineyard from the Boston area, and a great friend, came in literally just again to stunt in for one part, and that was the role of the gruff grocer. So thanks to Lenny for being part of our picture. Now back on stage 16 at Paramount, and you're heading into a sequence which, again, I'll just sort of include you in the nightmare of the director's process. There's a sequence where, again, Sonny Baudelaire is supposed to be very much involved in a part of it, and you're about to tear a house apart. You're about to send winds from a jet engine flying through a set, props flying, debris flying, sound being horrifying for little ones. So this was an absolute, again, just chess match in terms of figuring out moment to moment, day to day, how to do all of this. So you will, of course, notice that, interestingly, the kids, it would seem out of safety, deposited Sonny back in the other room. Well, no, that's the director completely trying to protect himself so that he can at least get through a big portion of the sequence without having to deal with the baby. And what you do, again, is you once again squeeze, lemonade out of lemons. And there were many moments in the creation of story where I would take that obstacle and turn it into something that worked for us. So I knew as I was starting to prep the scene that I just could not have the baby be present, and we would never get through it. As it was a sequence that took us a couple of weeks to shoot. So she's deposited, and then, of course, the question is she simply forgotten? And you take that and you turn it on its ear to make sure it's a story point. So, of course, as the house really begins to fall apart, they cry out for Sonny. Where is she? And you use her reveal to be the conduit into revealing Ike's room. So what looks like a nice piece of story intention, I'm just here telling you the truth. That's basically how do we dodge the baby. And upon repeated viewings, you may find other moments in the film which effectively accomplish the same thing. But this was, again, a sequence which we had devised prior to the beginning of production, but what we realized was that, which is never, I think, a discovery you want to make this close to shooting a sequence, there was not enough true sense of, I think, invention and jeopardy at this point in the picture that we needed, based on the house simply falling apart and the kids running out the door, which honestly was effectively the design of the sequence. So that led to discussions, and we're talking literally less than a week away. Walter Parks and I putting our heads together with Bob Gordon, trying to figure out how can we up the stakes. Oh, there's the baby. See, she's been there the whole time. She's all part of the story. Right. And so that led itself to this idea, which was that as the house fell apart, as all of Josephine's paranoias came true, which was a real stroke of, I think, genius on Bob Gordon's part. That was never a notion in the books, and Bob strung together this idea, which I then tried to execute, and I'm quite happy with how we were able to pull it off. This wonderful Rube Goldberg-like chain reaction of every one of Josephine's fears coming true. But those fears coming true, the kids hitting the ground, nice piece of work there by Stefan Fangmeyer and his group. walking refrigerator, Michael Lantieri's sort of nightmare. Yes, I want a refrigerator to walk over to the kids. We realized that we wanted to create this great little bit of sleight of hand where suddenly the kids, upon looking up and the horrors of this hurricane having passed by, they are now absolutely stranded. So we're calling Mike Lantieri on a Saturday night at home, having just walked through the set and dreamed up this very different approach to a sequence for something that he's now then going to have to be able to, that duck. Where's a duck when you need a duck? To be able to completely revamp. And so the transition you're about to see is truly a testament to the resilience of Mike and his crew. Effectively, what they did was took a motion base, a flight simulator base, and Rick Heinrichs and his group and John Dexter created this raft remnant, if you will, that's first revealed on this shot after the director himself almost drops the hydrant on top of the actor. And here you see what we called the raft. And so that portion of the house on the left, as well as the raft, that is there on stage 16. But basically that raft is on a flight simulator that's basically about 9-10 feet off the ground, maybe a little bit higher, completely encircled by blue screen. And to a certain extent, because we devised this sequence as late as we did, and frankly because of the scope of it suddenly, this is probably the one sequence in the picture which departs a bit from not the ultimate style, but from the approach, which was that we had to basically blanket ourselves in blue screen. But once again, Stefan and his group at ILM did the best possible work, because they took the stone textures and the sort of rock wall that you do see there on set behind the house, and then used that as their inspiration to help fill it out. But I always marvel at the water work, at the sense of every bit of flying steam and debris. Everything you're looking at there is 100% digital. The sky work, and back to story, coming up with one of, I think, the simpler but kind of more entertaining pieces of Violet's invention, which is this idea of, if they're going to go over on this raft, if they're going to potentially break, make sure you break it in the direction of the house. Daniel Handler, I think, has done an incredible thing in creating this idea of Violet, which is, there really is no magic in the world of Lemony Snicket. The world of Lemony Snicket is not kind enough to supply magic. And the kids basically only have their own common sense. And Violet is an inventor who is all about resourcefulness. Somebody said if it were a contemporary bit, it would be MacGyver, but I think she's a whole lot more interesting and cuter than that. And that is, she basically cobbles together materials at her handy, if you will, and manages to put them together in smart and interesting ways. Now, in some cases, those are written out in the novels. In some cases, they're not. And so the only torture that we kind of continually experienced was, how do we make sure that we're coming up with interesting and smart enough and resourceful enough pieces to earn the right to be Violet's inventions. The sequence of then heading over to Curdled Cave, again, a phenomenal piece of CG work here on Stefan Fangmeyer's part. Here, a 100% digital image, brings us to what was now one of 4 sets we had built on our tank in Downey. Normally with tank work, you build a set, you strike it, you go away somewhere else, God willing, for at least a few days. Note the eye coming into the cave, and turn a set around. Well, we just did not have that luxury. And so one of the arguments we made to the studio, and basically asking them to build us a giant tank, was that we needed to build 4 sets concurrently. So you're looking here at a 100% in-camera stage set in Downey. If you can imagine a football field, just imagine building on each flat plane of that field, both in the end zones and on the sidelines, a different set. So we had Curdled Cave, we had Damocles Dock, we had our briny beach, and then ultimately we had our, if you will, open water on Lake Lachrymose for the leech attack scene, all existing concurrently. That was really the only way we were ever going to get through our schedule. So I just think this is a case where you're getting together craftsmen who normally just aren't put to work in Hollywood these days. A movie like this normally would end up in in London, in Prague. But we, for a number of reasons, beginning with the director not being able to leave town because his family can't, we stayed in L.A. And the advantage of that was there's an awful lot of tremendous talent here. Scenic painters, masons, other great artisans who Rick was able to bring in. And hopefully in some of the supplemental materials you'll get a glimpse of them doing some of their work. It's awe-inspiring, and you almost can't take it in as a director. You need to just keep your head down, make your plans, work up your designs with your designer, and look the other way. Because if you actually see the number of people at work and the commitment they have, it's you just want to sit and thank every one of them, and you'd never get anything done. So I'll give you a little glimpse. If you take a look carefully at that baby there, that is not Shelby or Kara. And the odd thing in this film is we had moments there, Shelby. We had moments because of those time restrictions I was telling you about, where one of the girls might be down, or the girls may just not be in good shape or asleep. And what we did, Michelle Vanitas, my fantastic first AD, and I tried to at least devise a little bit of a backup system where we had for coverage where the face wouldn't be seen, or where we thought we were wide enough to maybe, with a little bit of sleight of hand, emphasize another part of the frame, we would stay away from the face. We had our backup babies, and two of the girls who were the Knight babies, their last name was Knight, were the most wonderfully cooperative and docile and sweet young things. And so there are certain moments in the picture where if you look carefully enough, you will actually see them. So here we are now on that fourth wall, as I describe it. You're looking at basically an incredible painted backing. The hardest thing being always the transition from one's tank into the backing, and the darker sort of band of light that you see at the bottom of the frame is the weir wall, is the division of the tank itself flowing over into our backing. And the only thing that we actually had ILM help us with is there were certain moments where the director didn't behave and actually got the camera lower so that the backing itself could get continued up. We also had, because of how quickly we had to make the picture, especially towards the end of the schedule, we had so much work to do. Unfortunately, at one point, I think some of the backing actually ran in the process of it being folded up and then unfolded. Some of the paint ran, so our friends at ILM were able to help us touch some of that up in a number of these shots, but never quite give it away. And then, of course, there are the leeches. The leeches are, again, a wonderful piece of creation from the third book, and in a sense kind of bring up a great question about tone. You've got in the series of books what some might construe as a really dark set of circumstances, and yet, again, these books are just phenomenally popular with young people. And so if you're the director and you're coming in trying to stay faithful and truthful to a story that you've been inspired by reading these books, one of the first things you need to do, because it's a major scale movie you're about to go make, is to kind of protect the film. And that is that if in the 11th hour you've got a studio, or studios in this case, who might get a little bit of cold feet, want to make sure that all the nice moms and dads out there in the world are going to feel great and happy taking their kids to a movie that, frankly, they don't really know much about. As a director, you know you've got a potential problem. And so I did something that was really, I think, a move of self-preservation. Before we started shooting, we pulled together a group of young readers of these books, mostly ages 10 to 13, brought them into the art department on a weekend, and videotaped them, did like a town hall meeting, effectively, to sort of borrow from our political landscape these days. And I just pummeled them with questions on tape. And I said, basically, I'm heading off to make this movie. You guys have to tell me, what should be in this movie. But I can tell you one thing that shouldn't be in this movie. Certainly, these people shouldn't die. Nobody wants to see leeches. Nobody wants to see a baby dangled from a cage. And basically, I just baited the kids into really expressing truthfully all of what they frankly read these books for, what the tone is that they respect, and what they would absolutely rebel against having sanitized from the film. And it was incredibly telling. The remarkable bits where the kids, again, they explain that all of that texture, all of what some might construe as dark, is the very reason that they come to it, because it doesn't feel like it's a candy-coated bit of storytelling. And then asking them effectively, what do some of these what do these landscapes look like? What are the sets look like? It was wonderful. You had kids who literally would just take their finger and sort of slowly point over to the wall and effectively kind of create a little coronation moment for us with artwork and verify that we were all headed off in the right direction. So that said, you eventually go through a screening process, and it's an interesting moment to talk about the sort of fears that do come up. You know, you have a process where you begin to do test screenings, market test screenings. Obviously, our film was going to be playing to families, so we had young people as well as older people coming. And a really interesting phenomenon showed itself at the very first screening, which is the kids off the charts, just completely with the movie. And the adults, more so the mothers than the fathers, and much more so those who had not read these books, were really taken aback and were shocked that this was a story in which not only were these kids left alone, but they were left alone in a world that had effectively no adults who would actually listen to the kids, no good guardians who weren't ultimately selfish, and a lead character in Count Olaf who wants to do nothing but basically make these kids perish and take their money. It's a pretty bright premise, and they were very thrown by it. So it began a process of real sort of examination and soul searching, and honestly, a lot of heel digging. You do have two studios who have a tremendous investment in the piece, and yet they know in their hearts that it's an unusual story, and that if they violate that, they're going to be in great trouble. So I think I've never gone through a testing process that's had as many tests. I think we probably ended up testing 7 or 8 times, and always with sort of slight balancing to see if there were any particular hot buttons that necessarily either won or lost those adults. It's interesting because the marketers might worry that it's the moms who must drive the kids to the theater, but I think as a filmmaker, you always have to work with the belief that audience that's going to see your movie, they're going to find a way to see that movie. And so you've got a director sort of saying to studios and producers, I know they're going to come. They will find a way. They will go with their friends. They'll hop on a bus. Dustin Hoffman will show up in your movie. You never know what's going to happen. And ultimately, we were able to really hang on to a film that there's no question could have sort of spun out into the world of sort of sanitization. The couple of I think the couple of interesting deleted moments that you'll find in our deleted scene section that were, I think, balance questions are really interesting to examine. One of them was back in the first act of our picture where Count Olaf slaps Klaus, and that is an iconic moment that Jim Carrey and I were determined to keep in the picture, and that without which we thought we would have been, I think, just stepping on the story as it was supposed to be. And you're into another one here. You're into a really, as I say, I don't think the moral majority is particularly loving the idea that you've got a man, an adult, actually marrying a 14-year-old, even though it's a ruse. It's a really unique piece of storytelling. But when in doubt, you always raise the flag as the director and say, let's remember how many of these books are on the New York Times bestseller list. How is it that they could possibly be wrong?
Take it to makeup. Enjoy. Embrace the butterflies.
This is ridiculous. Violet's only 14. She can't be legally married.
She can if she has the permission of her guardian. And who's that? Oh, yes. Me! Look it up, bookworm.
I mean, we're coming up now to a moment itself, which is, again, a tremendous hot button, but you just have to keep it in. And actually, I love the pleasure with which the Hoffman twins got to play this out. And that, of course, is going to be the reveal of our young Sonny up in a cage suspended from Count Olaf's tower. Not necessarily one of the kinder images to an infant, but I mean, in a way, it is the iconic moment of the first book in the series. Storytelling-wise, interesting flip. in the books originally, and in the bad beginning, Sunny is suspended from Count Olaf's tower, and that is basically she's being held there as collateral to make sure that the kids will go through the marriage. And it's Violet who, of course, in her inventive ways, comes up with a mechanism with which she can pull herself up to try to rescue Sunny, only to encounter the hook-handed man. So again, just moments of interpretation and moments of how one has to demand a certain freedom and not stick too religiously to the books. We've already now at this point seen an incredible amount of inventiveness on Violet's part. And it struck me that if we were going to really have a classic third act climax, that the girl who's always got a solution for everything, who's always effectively buoying up her spirits and her brothers and her sister's spirits, that she's going to finally have to hit a wall, and that she's going to have lost faith, and that she's going to have to believe that sort of the road is, they've hit a dead end and the road is done. And that was the genesis of this, I think, beautifully performed moment here coming up where Emily Browning and Liam Aiken are left alone. It's a real relationship conclusion. And I remember saying to the kids that at their tender age, I said, this is the closest you're going to come to playing a breakup scene or doing the end of Casablanca. And they actually got it, and they responded to that. So what you've got is then Klaus, fueled by just the stomach-dropping realization that his sister doesn't have a solution and has lost faith, and that she's now going to have to effectively sell herself into this sort of really twisted slavery. And that just struck me as an opportunity not to be wasted, where, because for the first time the kids are separated. We've always seen them together as a twosome or a threesome in each of their adventures. Now they're forcibly separated, and that meant that we had an opportunity to effectively have Klaus literally have to channel Violet. This great question of what would Violet do? What would Violet do? Meant that the guy who's a tremendous book reader and a great researcher gets to really draw upon his sister's strengths to try to rescue Sunny. And so that lent itself to really the whole idea behind this scene. One of the aspects that is always, again, painful too, in sort of weighing out story drive and especially at the end of a picture, what you can include and not include, was the incredible contribution of these two women, and that is Jennifer Coolidge and Jane Addams, our two white-faced women, who both are, again, also phenomenal improvisational actors, as is Louis Guzman, Craig Ferguson, Jamie Harris, sort of just this wonderfully horrible acting troupe of Jim Carrey's. And so definitely begging everybody to make their way over at the conclusion to look at the deleted scenes. Just some just very spirited and very smart improv brought into the picture. Jennifer, in particular, I think when I was trying to collect everybody's stories of their worst experiences in acting companies, Jennifer's memories were very vivid. And we all sat around together at the Chateau Marmont where we were rehearsing, and remember her saying that effectively she was in one theater company where all they did the entire year was just talk about the flyer for the play that they were going to be doing. They never actually rehearsed the play. I don't even know if the play was written, but they spent every meeting talking about the flyer. So that, of course, became great inspiration for us when we were thinking about how horrible not only the earlier troupe scenes could be in terms of casting, but the very conclusion here, one of the deleted moments, is the kids are revealed in their dressing room, which I had to cut, unfortunately, just for story drive purposes, was Jennifer trying to basically convince young Violet that the theater is just a brutal life. And Jennifer, when she came in to meet me, this is just a smart and funny woman, looked at me and said, I don't know who this is, but here's who she might be. And once again, I just asked her to talk about how could she convince Violet not to be competition for her. I was sort of just threw out an improv premise and said, okay, you've got 1 minute to convince this girl not to be your competition. Go. And she headed off onto this spectacular improv about how demeaning the life of the theater is, because normally you end up only getting to be a tree, or sometimes you're not even the tree. You're the dirt beneath the tree. And then they turn the lights out on you and you're forgotten. And so, of course, when it came time to shoot that backstage scene, I said to Jennifer, you have no choice. You're going to have to do that again. So, again, that became a great opener for a scene which just, it's the editorial process is brutal, and that you have to constantly kill your babies. And some of your favorite moments you have to realize are in and of themselves wonderful, but are not serving the storytelling. There's a certain critic present here at the festivities at the end of our film here, who looks suspiciously like Dustin Hoffman. Dustin came in as a favor for a morning, and there is just golden material with Dustin and Cedric the Entertainer, who had never met before this particular morning we shot. And again, you just got to make sure that you're not just taking sort of detours for the sake of detours, and you have to stay with your story drive. But Dustin, many people have asked me how that came about, and Dustin is so very similar to that great character you saw at the beginning of Tootsie, the actor who is the quintessential actor, who's always looking for a part. Yes, he could be a tomato. He could be a ripe, juicy tomato. And Dustin was in my last picture, Moonlight Mile. We had a wonderful working experience together. We were together in Europe when I first got the call about this picture, and bumped into him maybe 2 months later as I was prepping, and in his own Dustin-like way, approached and said, "So why aren't I in your movie?" And reminded him very quickly that there was not a part for him in my movie, that there were no roles for anybody his age, which of course I love to rub in. And Dustin, not missing a beat, said, "I know, I researched it thoroughly," and said, come on, come up with something. So the great thing is Jim and I laughed and thought, great, we got to bring him in. And maybe the greatest victory for Dustin is to get to come in and to be a theater critic. So gave him his chance to come in, and we did conceive him as the only critic who would actually, of course, think that Count Olaf is just an acting genius, and that this play is just transforming in terms of the world of theater. So there you go. Story creation, again, interesting balancing act at the end of this particular story. Over the course of the series of unfortunate event books, one is presented with a mystery, which is exactly how did the Baudelaire home burn down? And though all indicators, and I do stress indicators, point toward Count Olaf, who's constantly referred to as a grand arsonist throughout the books, we had to walk a fine line, and that is that you do have a book series, and not one book or two books or three books, but a book series which is rolling out a set of revelations. And so we kept up pretty constant communication with Daniel, but we knew we needed to have a satisfying motion picture which posits a question and answers that question. And so the balance we needed to strike was, can we explain how the Baudelaire mansion burned, give every indication as to who did it without physically coming out and saying the words? So if you sit and parse this sequence, I don't think there's anybody who comes away without realizing that, yes, indeed, it was Count Olaf who there in his tower with that wonderful ocular contraption, based very much actually on old science, believe it or not. We had great illustrations, Rick and I, in the art department, of these gigantic magnifying glasses used as odd weapons to try to burn fleets of ships out in the distance. It seems ridiculous, but there it was. But we needed to create this, and yet if you, again, examine the sequence, you'll actually never hear the words that you did it, that Olaf did it. And that's sort of the result of this little bit of a balancing act. So you do your best to try to at least come up with a satisfying conclusion, but at the same time not violate the author's wishes. And Daniel, to his credit, ended up being very content and realizing, as he said, that a movie's a movie and a book is a book. And so here Klaus gets to try to basically hoist Olaf with his own petard, again using a pretty brilliant piece of prop creation. Jerry Moss, whom Rick Heinrichs has worked with a number of times, and his pretty awesome crew managed to take what would be sort of flights of fancy coming out of my brain or Rick's brain and bring them to life. So here the idea was an eye that could be referenced earlier in the picture with that illustration that has that sort of weird Jules Verne sort of fluidity to it. and can be functional for an actor, can be photographed, cannot make us end up staring at ourselves in reflection. Pretty tricky, and managed to pull it off incredibly well. Olaf's Tower there again, stage, I believe that was actually stage 14 at Paramount, and continued off a little bit with some help from my friends up at ILM. Again, a sequence which seemed to be really satisfying potentially, and which at one point our budget and schedule was looking like was not going to be allowed for, was a sequence which I called in my storyboarding process Olaf's Do, and that is basically these great images of punishment that are, in theory, fantasy moments of punishment. Lemony Snicket telling us, "I'd love to tell you that this and this and this happened." And thankfully, we actually, I tend to be pretty crafty about this, and if there's something I know I need, I will find a way. And Jim Van Wyck was instrumental in helping me find a way to get these pieces done. And of course, interestingly, emotionally for the audience, as we began to test the film, we found out that these were not only important, but they were crucial. And they ended up being a big part of the audience, enjoying some sense of Olaf being punished because, of course, in the end, and this is what's referenced here, Olaf always escapes. It is a benchmark in each of these stories, had to be part of our film. And so Jude, of course, here gives us verbally that confirmation that Olaf has escaped. What you'll find in my deleted scenes was, and again, talk about killing your babies, was one of probably the most enjoyable sequences to shoot in the film, and certainly I think belied Jim Carrey's patience. We originally came back to the Baudelaires having seen the fantasy sequence of Jim's punishment, and then revealed that no, of course, he has not been captured, not punished, and beyond that is going to make an escape and flies out in this wonderful sort of very Wizard of Oz-like way. You'll see that on the deleted scenes, unfortunately, ended up, to my great frustration, doing nothing but confusing the viewers, including the younger viewers, as to which was real and which wasn't. So oddly, the fantasy ended up becoming more credible as a reality. Go figure. Another, I think, piece of emotional payoff that I felt pretty strongly about it as we started to develop the screenplay was that though the parents have not left a will behind, that there is no specific piece of documentation explaining where the kids could go, I certainly didn't feel satisfied without feeling like there was some sense of at least encouragement or direction from the parents. Now, how do you do that? Obviously, they've perished, or at least seem to have perished, and there's nothing else in Mr. Poe's hand that indicates otherwise. So what that meant was creating this letter. It's the letter that Violet discusses earlier in the piece, really as a moment to, I just have to point out, look at this performance. Baby's first day of shooting is Shelby Hoffman, basically following her eyes around a set and immediately confirming to me that we made the right casting choice. Again, all of this material you're seeing was shot here within our first week once we'd recast the part. But back to the letter. So the idea that there had been a letter which was sent by the parents, never received. It was to the guilt of the kids earlier that they had thought that the parents had forgotten them and not. And so here, wonderfully, oddly, almost supernaturally, the letter arrives. There is an odd, suspicious-looking postman walking away who, I think if we looked more closely on his sleeve, we might see the initials VFD. And we have an opportunity now to provide a piece of, or as close a piece of direct contact as we can have from the parents to the kids. It's also why I had this image in my mind, which we just saw, that the ILM crew helped me with, of the kids walking back into not the ruins, but to their memories and the impressions of this house. So we photographed the kids with a motion control arm walking in to a set that was a portion of blue screen. And Rick Heinrichs and his design crew built effectively just one pristine staircase and one pristine entryway. And Stefan and the group up at ILM then cloned that and created that Pretty wonderful image you see of the kids walking in, so that you have an emotional memory, a glimpse of a home in shape that, frankly, you've never seen. You never got to see at the top of the picture, and that finally then goes ahead and disintegrates. So that then you have, in this letter, finally, again, I like to call it a bit of an emotional will. And it also then becomes this baton pass, if you will, an important baton pass from this character of Lemony Snicket. Rather than a dispassionate narrator, I think one of the things that struck me about Lemony is that he is clearly got an emotional involvement in these kids' lives. And as I talked to Jude Law for the first time when we asked him to do the role, I said to him that his participation is key, and he very much plays as much role as anybody, because you get a sense that his whole narration and his description of this story is like, it's like an SOS, it's like an emergency letter. And I think in his performance he did a phenomenal job doing so. But of course, somehow he has yet another connection to the parents, as have had all of our guardians. And with the passing of this baton, in this case, this spyglass, whose significance will become known in stories to come, we get to finally come full circle and realize that Lemony has not just been sitting up in this wonderful clock tower working on his next novel, but he's actually been an active participant in trying to keep tabs on the Baudelaire children, to document their every move. And we sort of have a collapse of time and space where he's come as close as he can to direct contact, and maybe even to, I think, fulfilling the wishes of a set of parents he was very close to. A set that I think Rick just did an amazing job on. He and I saw a giant clock interior in the city of Lowell, Massachusetts, an old abandoned clock tower that we came back and said, if we were going to have Lemony hiding anywhere, let's have it be that. Let's have it be in a space in which he can be observing. There we go. Your first of those 4 shots of a completely digital Sunny. Again, concluding here with the exterior of that clock tower, and that sense that no, the Baudelaires have not ended up with a fantastic, phenomenal new guardian, but they kind of have to be the guardians of their own selves, that they have the resourcefulness and resilience, I think, to kind of face whatever's going to be coming next. And so even though they're in the back of Mr. Poe's car again at the end of the picture, we have a sense that they'll be able to tackle whatever comes next. The image you're seeing was something that I stumbled upon as we were shooting the film. I looked over one night on stage 14 at Paramount and saw one of our backings from Olaf's backyard raised halfway. It was in this beautiful half light that Chivo had working, and I looked, and it was the oddest optical illusion I've ever seen, where it looked like a sort of credible reality just folded up. And so I think at some point I warned Stefan that I was going to be coming at him in post-production to help me take the final image of the movie and effectively just remind everybody of the wonderful artifice of the storytelling that indeed the whole film has been sort of a backing that's being raised. And I knew that in keeping with, I love to not have the audience get taken out of a picture at the top of a movie with a credit sequence. I tend to be one who likes to do credits at the end. But this was a case where I had a sense of those kids falling asleep at the end of the film, an image that I thought was going to be crucial. They've been so on the run, so on the move, and finally they have a sense of peace and get to sleep. But I felt that the credit sequence, I think, offered up an opportunity to almost go inside their heads as they're sleeping. And it's phenomenal company, Axiom, Brent and his crew in Salt Lake City, had done work for us on some early artwork design for our poster, our one sheet, as well as what they call a style guide, which is an important book of art elements that all of the merchandising and other people need at hand. I contacted him and said, you know what, I want you to come in and I would love for you to design a sequence, a dreamscape, effectively, that I can use for my credit sequence. They had designed these wonderful, almost like Indonesian shadow puppet figures of our characters that are sort of part Japanese anime, part shadow puppet, somewhat Edward Gorey-ish in their feel. And I just love them. So he went off, and again with this idea of a very dreamscape-like quality of what are those story moments that the kids, even in their dreams, are going to feel when Olaf is always pursuing them. He is that man from your nightmares as a kid who won't stop coming after you. But freed up by the sort of nonlinear quality that we have in dreams, this is what they came back with. And it's a piece that was only concluded weeks before the film was set for release. And I think, in its own way, kind of an artistic coda for the movie. I think I'm still proudest of how, a group of, well over 500 people came together and committed themselves to something that was unreal, that was going to be theatrical and boldly artificial, and yet hopefully leave you with the feeling of having read a great book when you were a kid, that we would hopefully be able to create images that would only further inspire the imagination as opposed to try to fill in all the blanks. And so the credit sequence, I think, more than lives up to that spirit. A number of the other tremendous contributors who I think also helped fill out that spirit, and are really, I have to take the moment to talk about. On the performer side, Timothy Spall, a remarkable actor who is part of Mike Leigh's troupe, amongst many other contributions to the acting craft in the UK. He's that guy that everybody recognizes here in the US, but they don't necessarily know his name. And he was one of the first people that I was excited to talk about, because the interesting challenge with Mr. Poe is, again, you need somebody who is sort of wonderfully feckless and clueless, and that yet there has to be a heartbeat beneath it. And as you saw in our final sequence, there is this beautiful moment of contrition where somehow he's aware enough that he realizes that he maybe has not been the most sensitive to the kids, and it's he who comes up with that idea to actually stop there at the house. So a really wonderful friend and collaborator, and again, very Dickensian sort of presence. Many would know him from, again, Topsy-Turvy, from the incredible film Secrets and Lies, which was the first time I think I ever really paid great attention to him. And then you jump to the other side of the craftsmen who, to again help create the real feeling and spirit. Michael Kahn is really one of our editing masters who is alive and working today. I got to work with him on my first film. He's normally otherwise occupied with this director guy that people know as Steven Spielberg. But I caught a lucky break, which was that I know how quickly Mike works and Steven works, and they had just wrapped up work on Steven's picture, The Terminal, as I was getting going. And I think wasn't completely honest and said, "Hey, Mike, can you come in and maybe lend a hand?" And Michael Kahn, bless his heart, he cut together my third act in about 4 days. And granted, yes, we did other work, but this is an instinctual talent, an incredibly humble man, and somebody who was truly my sort of co-writer in post-production. And again, it was my great fortune to catch him at a moment where his other collaborator was taking a little time down. But Mike's sense of rhythm and again, story confidence are always incredibly inspiring. And the oral aspect of the movie, which is so important because it's quite non-literal, comes from just an absolute master, and this Richard King, whom, if anybody was paying attention to the Oscars back in 2003, would have seen him pick up that incredible 2004, that incredible Oscar for Master and Commander. Richard and I had worked together in Moonlight Mile, and defines the idea of sound designer. Yes, a tremendous technician in terms of being a great sound editor, but more than that, really, again, a creator and a writer. And I think it's probably now the albatross around Richard's neck that on each film there's probably going to be a key sequence in which he has to really go out and, in addition to using other recordings that he may have already kind of culled together, has to really create and design. And I know we have here on the discs a great glimpse into Richard's work recording the destruction of a house that was going to be absolutely part of the character and storytelling and the destruction of Josephine's. So he's somebody that you fight to get to come work on your picture. You want him in early and you want him there late. And Richard provided effects to us even as I was shooting, and Michael was early in the cutting process and was there to the bitter end. He's somebody that you discuss story with, discuss character with, and who comes at you with design ideas, and again, non-linear, non-obvious choices that, again, just really define really what the skills of that craft are. Listening to this final cue it is its own reminder to me of the again, the tenacity and just, I like to call it the great competitive spirit of my friend Thomas Newman. Tom was actually first man in the boat when I came back to Los Angeles to sit down and to meet with both studios about doing this picture. Was having breakfast that very morning with Michael Gorfain, who is a great friend and is probably the agent of the finest composers out working in Hollywood today. And I told him about the movie and said, if I do this, boy, I'm going to hammer you to get me in a room with Tom, whom I've never worked with. And so Tom and I struck up a relationship. It was very odd, felt like we'd always known one another. And he set about creating what is an unbelievably challenging score. You've got a score that has to have its own wonderful sense of gothic playfulness. It's got to commit to some real moments in jeopardy. It's got to, again, have an enticing quality, just not be a cookie-cutter score. And certainly that defines Tom Newman, and he's come up with something that I think has this great old world quality. He works in an unusual fashion, pulls together session players to do experimentation, work with acoustic instruments, and then from those jams ends up doing his more formal orchestral work and synthesizes it all in a way that I think is just unique. And we had so much work to do, and everything was so last minute on this picture that Tom, it was just, again, emotional resilience that kept him going, because boy, we had no time. Right down to the arrival of this credit sequence, and I was fully prepared to have to, with Bill Bernstein, Tom's fantastic music editor, to cut together a musical montage that would work with the end credit sequence. But knowing Tom and knowing that if he saw it, he would go run with it, I showed up at his home one morning on a Saturday, and he said, "Well, okay, I know I wasn't going to do it, but take a look at this." And it proceeded to run for me a sketch of the cue that is now known as Drive Away, which is one of the most hypnotic, fantastic pieces of music in the movie. And between the cue and the actual sequence, it's been a pleasure each time to watch an audience just begin to get out of their seats and then suddenly absolutely have to sit back down. It's a cue that I've already heard now playing on some very tony radio stations, and again, just to me defines Tom's spirit of he's always going to go down to the mat and make sure that he's got every last piece of contribution he could make. This was a journey that took about 19 months. We worked down to the wire. We knew a release date when we began the project. We ended up shooting for 7 months, beginning in November of 2003 and wrapping up beginning of June of 2004. Close to 130 shooting days, more feet of film than I can imagine. But I know something was going on when the representative from Eastman Kodak brought me a bottle of champagne, and I knew that we had shot some film between babies and many unfortunate events. We were rolling, but you kind of come to the end of a process and look at it, and you do come away with a sense of pride and appreciation of what everybody's contributed. That's my last 2 years. What have yours been like?